The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
Oh, the humanity!
The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every
Let us
city.
not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead.
They say that those who forget their history are condemned to repeat it. This is the History Lessons Podcast with certified financial planning practitioner Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor, and your guide to financial wisdom in the past, present, and future. You ready? Good. Let's get historical.
Historical? Indeed. This is the History Lessons Podcast, and I'm Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor. And in this episode, we're talking with author, speaker, Air Force veteran, and World War II historian Mark Vlahos. Growing up in Virginia, Mark's love of history was forged in the very places where it came alive. As a young teenager, he visited colonial Williamsburg and was captivated by the colonial militia and the rhythmic snap of the Williamsburg fife and drum corps. At the age of 18, he purchased his first musket, igniting a lifelong passion for military history and reenacting. What began as a hobby evolved into a meaningful pursuit, marked by highlights like participating as a background extra in Ted Turner's epic Gettysburg. But history wasn't just Mark's passion, it seemed to foreshadow his destiny. With a steadfast commitment to service in 1982, Mark graduated from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. 2 years later, in 1984, he earned his navigator wings, launching a 29-year career that saw him flying C-130 transport aircraft, VC-137 presidential planes, and excelling in key leadership positions. Mark retired in 2011 as a colonel, having served with distinction across flying missions and headquarters staff roles. Mark's connection to storytelling and history deepened during his time in the Air Force. In 1994, while stationed at the Pentagon, he began his freelance writing career. His first two articles were published in Washington Times' popular Saturday Civil War page, capturing his commitment to exploring pivotal moments in history. Meeting over 40 World War II veterans at squadron reunions in the 1980s and 1990s further motivated him to preserve their legacy. Today, his contributions go beyond presentations. He actively researches and provides historical insight to organizations like the National World War II Glider Pilot Association, as well as the Troop Carrier Tactical Airlift Association. Through these efforts, he helps families connect with the stories of their loved ones while ensuring history is never forgotten. Amen. Listen, Mark's story is a masterclass in translating history into lessons on leadership, resilience, and decision-making, qualities that resonate deeply with me and with today's investors and leaders navigating modern challenges. So with all that said, let's get started. Well, cool. I'm through about half of it. And man, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, that was
to write it, not to read it.
Yeah, 3 years of research, writing, and I use social media a lot, to reach out to family members. I say, hey, did you have a relative in this unit? And that's how you actually come up with a lot of. Every once in a while, I call it gold. The search for gold. Pictures, personal stories. That are in the attic, in the archives, or whatever. The attic archives, I call them, and the people I meet along the way. That's the forensics, the chase. That's what I love.
Yeah. And I would assume that there's a fair amount of it. And I think you just pinpointed one positive. There is one positive out there about social media.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if you do Facebook at all, but I actually admin on two Facebook groups for two specific, C-47 units in World War II. And I have about 400 people, 500 people on each page. Many of them are descendants. And I've connected them to each other. Obviously through my work, and that's a neat thing to do too. Yeah,
it's unfortunate. I was connected with a guy who was doing a lot of World War II history, Gary Mortensen, out in Oregon, and this was 5-10 years ago, and he kept saying, "Man, we're getting to the point where we lose so many World War II veterans every day it's now a second generation thing to find these records and to get the stuff that you're putting into your book.
Yeah, it's in many cases now it's grandchildren, and
Yeah.
like you said, and as you know, you've probably talked to other World War II authors. I know I want to hear about you too, your work, but these guys didn't talk about what they did with their own families, only when they were together with their buddies, at unit reunions in the 1980s and 90s. And I was fortunate to sit in on a few of those because of my Air Force career, and that's when those guys talked, and but their kids, their daughters, sons, daughters, and grandkids now, they have no idea, in a lot of cases, what their relative did. They have a box of stuff, which some of them don't speak military. It's got documents and papers and orders, and I can translate what that means to them. And it really, we help each other. So it's fun.
Yeah, I can remember. I would not have known that my grandfather was a Marine who landed at Iwo Jima if I hadn't found one of his kind of secret stash photo books from the war. They just didn't talk about
it. No, they didn't. And but this is funny. This is how I stay mentally challenged in my retirement from the Air Force. I play pickleball and and work 5 acres of land to stay physically busy. But this is my, and it's kind of morphed into something that's, it's fun.
Tell me a little bit about your career.
Attended Virginia Tech, got a commission through ROTC, ended up going out to undergraduate navigator training at Mather Air Force Base. And, and lo and behold, ended up staying 29 years. I just kept getting neat places, primarily assigned to the C-130.
Yep.
I did 4 years of special duty flying presidential flight support out of Andrews Air Force Base, with the 89th Airlift Wing on basically 707 aircraft. And that was a very fun job, 4 years of that. Yeah, amazing. I could talk forever about that. And what's interesting is I'm writing one of the books I'm writing right now. I'm working on 3 other books right now. And one of them is for the Daedalians, which is a society of military aviators, which I belong to.
Okay.
And I'm writing the story of one of the first female pilots in the Air Force, and she was the first female Daedalian, actually. The Air Force didn't allow women to go to pilot training until 1977. Most people don't know that. And that's when, the battle to integrate women fully into the military, all military services started.
Yeah.
And it was a long 20 to 30 year battle that continues today. And it was a rough ride. So I'm writing a story of a Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Lasauce, but she was also the first woman pilot there at Andrews Air Force Base. We overlapped for 2 years. So she flew special air missions with the 89th Airlift Wing also, congressional delegations, cabinet members, and so forth like that. But she's 75 now. She has MS. She was medically grounded late in her career with MS. So it's kind of a time, critical time to get that story out too. But I also got 2 other World War II books going also. One of them in the final stages with the publisher right now. So, and I said, that's the one you should have waited for because it's a lot easier to read than this thing.
We'll have you back. It's fine. We can do multiple shows.
Yeah. No, thanks. So tell me about, what do you focus on? What got you into history? Your background. I'm sorry, I don't know much about you.
I got into history. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and I will never forget my dad taking me to Gettysburg when I think I was in middle school. And I've told this story before, but you look around at all the monuments on the field at Gettysburg. I don't know if you've ever been there. The biggest monument is the Pennsylvania Monument because they were able to raise the most money because it was in their backyard. And around the cupola are all the names, the generals from Pennsylvania that fought. And then they continue down on the interior walls.
Right.
I looked up in there and I saw the name Huey. So I saw my last name on this amazing marker on the field at Gettysburg. And from that day forward, I devoured everything I could about the Civil War. And then that kind of just turned into a general love of military history. I took some great courses at the University of Pittsburgh when I was in ROTC on military history. And it just kept going from there. I kept reading a lot of history and historical fiction when I was deployed. So There it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we have a lot in common, as I'm about to tell you. So I grew up in Virginia. 60% of the Civil War was fought in Virginia.
Yep.
I was a pure Civil War guy. I just got into World War II, actually, about when I wrote my first World War II book about 8 years ago. But I was a Civil War. I still am a Civil War reenactor for 40 years now. I'm a background extra in the movie Gettysburg. I've been to Gettysburg about 40 times, by the way.
Okay. Well, then you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. But my Civil War, I have a lifetime collection of Civil War books, about 380 volumes. I have it all cataloged. I'm going to donate it probably to I got someone here in Texas who wants it, but if Virginia Tech will take it, they have a Civil War center. But I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
I've got wall-to-wall bookshelves in my. Many of these are out of print and old. And my first book I wrote and self-published was on Civil War, how the North raised their army.
Yeah.
It's called Winfield Scott's Vision for the Army. It was my first book.
Cool. Is that available on Amazon?
I believe it is. Yes, sure is.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
a simple paperback. By the way, that's easy. It's 205-page paperback read. But it's that was actually, I took my thesis from War College.
It's a Civil War beach book.
Yeah. And I took my thesis from War College. I went to ICAF at Fort McNair in 2005, in my senior service school in the military, and had an elective class. So I had wrote a 50-page paper that I later kicked out into my first book. So, well,
I tried to do something similar. I had I actually did all the research on who that Huey was on the monument. And I did that for my senior thesis at Pitt when I got my degree in history. And it turned out to be a pretty interesting story because if you know your Civil War history, before Gettysburg was Chancellorsville.
Right.
And at Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson was killed. Well, Stonewall Jackson was killed by his own men because they were extremely skittish after a cavalry charge had kind of stirred them up earlier in the day. That cavalry charge was that Huey's company who charged the North Carolinians.
Wow.
And, you could kind of give him credit for killing Stonewall Jackson in the Civil War. It's just interesting stuff.
Yeah, it really truly is. There's just so much about the Civil War that just fascinated me. And like I said, growing up in Virginia, I mean, I was in the Mecca. So, and I don't know how many times I've marched in Gettysburg Remembrance Day parades while I was stationed at the Pentagon and at Andrews, and did all the big stuff back there. And then I kind of retired out, and what I call the transfer to the Western Theater. I got into an infantry unit out here. And but now I just do artillery. We call it the lazy old guy, who don't want it. It's not quite as physically demanding. But a buddy of mine's a retired Army colonel. He has his own 3-inch ordnance rifle, and I'm one of his crew on that. And actually going to do it in April at Fort Blakely in Louisiana. There, it's going to be pretty awesome. 24-hour tactical situation type thing is pretty cool.
That's fun. How'd you get into that?
Oh, God, just growing up in Virginia. In high school, I joined my first Civil War reenactment unit in high school in Richmond, Virginia. And then I went in the Air Force. I had a break in, my Civil War service because going to flight school and being all over the world.
Yeah.
But as soon as I had a chance to get back into Civil War, it was like 1989, in which was the Mecca. The 1990s were the Mecca of Civil War reenacting. And I swear the 130th Gettysburg, in 135th Gettysburg, which I participated in, there were 25,000 guys on the field.
Yeah.
12,000 on each side. It was and I was there, being able to visualize that and seeing an entire Army Corps, 10,000 guys marching in column, that's one, is just amazing. But then you tell yourself, that's one Corps. Hell, they had 6 of those on the field, and that kind of stuff. You just can't fathom the numbers.
Yeah. Fun.
Yeah. So I'm a history nerd, and I'm 64 years old. Life's great, and this is the war room, by the way. You can't see it, but this is where I do my research, writing, and other stuff.
Yeah, when I did this book, when I did history lessons, this was a while ago.
Yeah.
I pulled some Civil War stuff in there. I told the story of Burnside's Mud March
Yeah.
which is one of my favorites. And after that, it's been 6 or 7 years since we've been in Florida, but we sold everything and traveled around the country in an RV for almost a year and did all the Civil War sites. And, I got to go to Chancellorsville. I got to go to Shiloh. I got to go to Gettysburg again, and see all that stuff. And it was really interesting to me because so much of it is disappearing. Kind of the urban sprawl is taking over, not Gettysburg. But if you want to go to,
the wilderness,
Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg.
Yeah, Fredericksburg and the wilderness are almost gone. So go soon.
Yeah. It's we have a fifth wheel too, by the way. We're not, but we go shorter trips, but it's a lot. I love it. My wife and I really, and the two dogs love going on the fifth wheel.
Oh yeah.
But she's been a war bride. As she said, I've seen every fort, there is on, but I could, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. The third time we were crisscrossing the country, the rule was no more battlefields.
Yeah, I hear that too all the time. Trust me, it's I get it. I get it. So I call it the green stamp exchange rate. It's 10-1 in their favor. So for every battlefield or fort, you got to go to like 5 or 10 wildlife preserves, or houses or plantations, or something of historical, other stuff that she's interested in.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the book, because
Sure.
there's some interesting stuff in there. Like I said, full disclosure, I haven't finished it yet, but
No worries. Yeah, it's a big read. It's technical too.
what I really love is I don't think there's enough knowledge out there about Operation Torch and the invasion of North Africa, and just how crazy it was trying to get the war machine up and moving, and then moving it all over there, and then going into action. So I thought that was really well done in the book, as far as describing what it takes from a logistical point of view to get this done. And obviously it didn't go well all the time. It was kind of a comedy of errors, but talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about what you found in your research, because I think it's fascinating.
Sure. And you're spot on. There's not a whole lot on Torch, and especially the air piece of it, which is, I believe I set out to, my goal is always to write the definitive history, whether I'm going to be a unit or an operator. Airborne assault in the 509th going to England first with the C-47 units. There's very little on that. And the 60th was the first C-47 unit to deploy to England, and they went over there at the same time. The second of the 509th, which became the 503rd, which became the 509th. I keep saying, part of the 82nd later, but they were the first U.S. Airborne Battalion and the first C-47 group to make it over to Europe. And this is, like you said, this is just 6 months after Pearl Harbor that these units deployed. And we just were behind the power curve in all aspects of ginning up the war machine, from, tank and airplane production to ships to training to, just the logistics. And as nothing moves without logistics. And it was just very difficult. One of those, the American column, I believe under Patton, they sailed from the U.S. to land in Africa, the naval column, one of the columns under Patton. And, but it just, the trying to orchestrate that with the British, it was our first attempt at a combined operation, allied, and just what a mess.
And with almost zero airborne experience. I mean, we had never done airborne operations before that.
No, the training we
did now.
Yeah, it was a pickup game. We were learning tactics, techniques, and procedures. We're building the airplane on the fly. Same with the airborne mission. It was just so new. And the gliders came into that a little bit later. But that was while Torch was going on. We were trying to build the glider pilot training in the States, program in the States. And my next book focuses a lot on that. But when you get to Sicily, I mean, right after Torch in North Africa, going across to Tunisia, the invasion of Sicily, you're going to really, really see lessons learned in blood, and how that trying to integrate gliders into an airborne mission. My next book, by the way, is American Glider Pilots in Sicily. But the 60th flew that mission, and you're going to read a lot about that in here. But to me, that was the biggest airborne disaster of the war. And Eisenhower, there were people who told Eisenhower, Eisenhower almost said, no more airborne missions in the war. It's too costly. It's too deadly. But luckily there are a few people who they stuck it out, and took the lessons learned in blood to heart, which really helped later in the war. When something goes wrong, you learn from it.
Yeah.
And try to correct things. And the good news is we did the right things. So when you think about the later airborne invasions in Europe, even D-Day, Market Garden, and then the Rhine crossing, you can just see as the war progressed, we got a lot better at airborne operations. But the infamousy, you're right, started with Torch.
Yeah, I talk a lot about that in my day job too, as far as, brief, fly, debrief, which was the mantra, when I was deploying and going overseas and flying jets. But
wow.
The idea is that if you want to get better at any human endeavor, it requires planning, and it requires debriefing afterwards to figure out what you did well and identify what you did poorly so you can get better at it. So
right.
I think those are huge lessons. And like I said, I try to bring that into my private practice as well, to get people thinking about how they're going to improve. Yeah.
So right. As the debrief, in that debrief room, after a sortie, equates to an after action report, an AIR mission reports, in an operation. And, that was the job of in World War II, each flying squadron, a C-47 squadron, had an intel shop, A2, built into it. And they interrogated, every pilot, every crew, every glider pilot. After a mission, they had to, fill out an interrogation sheet, and they collated all that and try to analyze that and fed all that up to the wing, and up to, and just tried to make sense of it so lessons could be learned.
Yeah. I would anticipate that you saw a fair amount of those in your research.
Oh yeah. I've read, probably hundreds of those individual crew reports and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's
and by the way, I'm glad you cover in this book, and I'm even more interested now that I understand you're going to do this about the Sicily operation. I'm glad you covered the glider stuff, because until I went to Normandy, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, I really didn't appreciate or understand the role that the gliders had. But man, you start going into the museums that are in the Normandy area, they talk a lot about the gliders.
Oh yeah. What's interesting, I sit on the executive committee of the World War II National Glider Pilot Association, kind of like their board of directors, a not-for-profit 501c3. But most people are unaware even that we had glider pilots in World War II. We produced over 6,500 of them. They were trained pilots. They went through an extensive training course. And you talk about the glider pilot wings, they have a G, for glider, but we call it the G stood for guts.
Yeah.
If you can imagine cutting loose, one, you're towed low and slow behind enemy lines at night, no night vision capability beyond what your naked eye could see, just a basic altimeter. You had no idea. Stone walls, rocks, trees, they tried to pick landing zones, but if the release point wasn't good, which their navigation skills at that time were very poor, tactical pilotage at night, and you cut loose, and then, man, it's a one-way ticket. It's a one-way ticket, and you're going with that glider, and the G stood for guts, and there's just so much about the glider pilots and the glider mission, and that was a huge part of the airborne mission.
Well, and the G could also stand for guns, because when they hit the ground, they picked up a rifle and became an infantryman. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, they were behind enemy lines, and what's interesting is in World War II, an airborne division had a glider infantry regiment built into it, because there just wasn't enough airlift, for all the, but the neat thing about the gliders, they brought the heavy equipment, the firepower, the airborne division, jeeps and small artillery pieces, anti-tank guns. That's what the glider did for the airborne mission. It brought that heavy equipment in so they could, fight tanks and armor, and, until they hooked up with ground forces, they were on their own. And that was the primary mission of the glider, because what replaced the glider on the battlefield was two things. The helicopter came, and then the capability, what I call to do heavy equipment airdrop, clamshell doors on the back of which was a C-82, a C-1, C-119, do heavy equipment airdrop loads from the air, to drop those guns and Jeeps and stuff. But that's what the glider did in World War II, brought in heavy equipment to the airborne force. That was its mission. And people too, obviously the crews of those weapons.
Yep. And especially in Normandy, because of the lack of intelligence on the terrain, they really suffered, man.
It was just at Market Garden, the drop zones were huge, more wide open. We had better land to work with. But you're right; those Normandy DZs were tight. Those fields surrounded by trees, the hedgerows. Some of the quote Rommel asparagus, if you telephone poles in the ground with wires between them with landmines hooked up on those, they built defenses against glider landings too, specifically. And, the glider mission, early in the war, the Germans used it very successfully in Crete, especially in Crete in the Mediterranean. And that's where, even though it was very costly, but we saw that, and that's where we said we need to develop a glider capability, for our airborne forces, and we did.
Interesting how a lot of our original tactics and our original, decisions on strategy, we kind of stole stuff from the Germans because they'd been doing it for 3 or 4 years prior to us entering the war, and they'd proven proficient at it.
Yeah, it was like 1940. The Germans landed a couple gliders on top of that in Belgium. That series of forts, the Maginot Line, and that ran through Belgium. They took an impregnable position by a secret raid at night with 77 guys and a couple gliders. They landed behind it and took. They just dropped grenades down the chimneys of these forts underground, and they had to surrender. It was just an amazing coup de grace, early in the war, 1940, secret use of gliders. Silent, you can't hear them coming. It's at night, and they just landed off. They're on top of you before you even wake up.
So I haven't gotten to this part in the book, but it sounds like there were some missions, a fair number of them, on rescuing downed airmen, which was, as a forward air controller, that was one of my missions that I flew. That I got the most enjoyment out of, even though I never did it in combat. It was always the one we took the most seriously because you're probably going out there to save one of your friends.
Very important.
Yeah. So to talk a little bit about that mission.
Yeah. Operation Halyard is what you're talking about, was the code name for that operation. It took place in Yugoslavia, behind Nazi lines. And we had a British special operations force on the ground working with local partisans, Chetniks, and they actually hacked out a dirt strip, a rough airfield, behind enemy lines. And you got to remember that the Americans were flying bombers out of Italy into Romania, in North Africa and Italy into Romania and Poland, the Plotsky mission and all that. But we had a lot of downed airmen, and that was Operation Halyard, was a mission to rescue those. And you're talking about a guerrilla package, a mass on one day. They pulled out, like the first day, couple days, 300 downed airmen. They sent a big C-47 formation behind enemy lines with a fighter package around it. You're talking about a guerrilla joint, a force package there, and combined arms. And the fighter aircraft, were shooting up stuff on the ground, and creating a diversion. Those C-47s actually landed on a rough strip behind enemy lines. Now think about this. This sounds like stuff we did in, Afghanistan and Iraq, and later operations, and pulled out those, downed airmen. And Operation Halyard ended up pulling out like 450 guys or so, behind enemy lines. This is an amazing story. That they even built this runway. It was a secret operation. A few British a team on the ground with an American radio operator, and just an amazing story.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about. I mean, I don't mean to say that it's easier now, because that type of thing is never easy. But you're talking about a period in World War II where we didn't have air superiority. So to go in behind enemy lines when you're still looking at Spitfires, all over the sky, that's a tough mission to send up there, and that's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah, it is. And the 60th flew the preponderance of Operation Halyard, of those landings, evacuating those airmen out of Yugoslavia. So that's just, and I call it, there's a whole chapter on the secret war in the Balkans that, again, a lot of people don't know about. And what's interesting, my work, I actually concentrate on the North Africa and Mediterranean. Actually, C-47 and glider operations is my area of expertise. I picked that area because I felt there was a niche to fill, a void in history. There's a lot written. A lot of my buddies who are in the same kind, they concentrate on Normandy, Market, the Rhine crossing, that European theater, but that's why I kind of focus on North Africa, Sicily, Greece, and Yugoslavia are my area of expertise.
And to the point we made earlier, that's when they were learning the hard lessons that really set them up for success on D-Day.
Yeah, exactly. And one entire wing of C-47s that was in the Mediterranean went back to England for D-Day. The 60th remained in there, the wing that they belonged to throughout the war in the Mediterranean. And that's why they did all that Yugoslavia ops in 1944, because they didn't go back to England for D-Day, like the preponderance of our, C-47 and glider pilots did. Yeah,
I think that what you're doing is something I've talked about with other authors, which is the democratization of history over the last 25 years, say, because of self-publishing, and I know you actually have a publisher, but because of self-publishing and because people can do this as a hobby, or they can do it as their retirement project, you're getting stories told that weren't told 50 years ago. So you can now talk about the gliders, and you can talk about Operation Torch, and you can educate people about these things. Whereas 50 years ago, if it wasn't about, Eisenhower, nobody wanted to talk about
it. Yeah, you're so right. And self-publishing has come a long way. I self-published my first book on lulu.com in 2015. And on the Civil War, but self-publishing is a great way to go. It's come very far, and there's a lot of great small niche authors like myself out there. I've quite a few friends. We kind of found each other and I don't have huge sales. I don't make huge amounts of money. But I do it more for the fill in the Air Force history. I'm continuing to serve in this way, and for the families. Is why I do it. Yeah. And but it keeps me busy. It's enjoyable, and it's morphed into something bigger than I originally thought it would.
Yeah. Well, you can tell you're having fun with it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's what the hell? That's what life's about, right? That and the fifth wheel, right, and playing pickleball, right? Yes.
So I know we want to focus on the Mediterranean theater, but I do also know that you were part of the 80th anniversary D-Day. Just talk about what that must have been like. Okay,
this is a great story, actually. So I stay busy. I sit on you can call it a board of over in the UK. I sit on a board over there that for 2 years now, the mission of this group is to build an airborne historical trail in the UK. Okay, this is about an hour north of London, where there were a bunch of C-47 and airborne troops were stationed. So it's actually called an airborne historical heritage trail in the UK. And I've been working for 2 years to build this. They brought me on because of my expertise with actually a different group, the 314th Troop Carrier Group, which flew out of RAF Saltby. And my second book I published, just as big as this one, actually bigger than this one, was on that group. Okay. And and this was the reason I picked the 314th was in my Air Force career, I was the vice wing commander of the 314th Airlift Wing at Little Rock, and their roots go back to World War II. And throughout my career, I've met several veterans because Little Rock's the mecca for C-130s. I was signed there 3 times in 3 different decades, and at various squadron reunions, I met probably over 50 D-Day veterans that flew C-47s in the 314th in the 1980s and 90s. I listened to their stories. They're all gone now. I met some of them in person. I know their family members. So I have a real tight connection between my own career and the World War II 314th. I wrote my second book on it. And what's neat is the airfield that they took off of on this Airborne Historical Heritage Trail is one of the flagship sites because it's still accessible to the public. So we spent a lot of time building up to the 80th anniversary of D-Day with this planning group over in England, and most of the people are in the UK, so they're on the ground. We built a full-day event on the 80th anniversary, and I was the speaker there, the keynote speaker there that day. And at RAF Saltby, where the 314th took off from, I was in an all-original World War II uniform, dressed as Colonel Clayton Stiles, who commanded the World War II 314th Troop Carrier Group. I'm best friends with both of his sons, his grandkids. And I gave my talk in first person as Colonel Stiles that day. And I talked for 45 minutes, almost an hour. And I had a bunch of slides. And it was probably one of the most, my wife was over there with me. We stayed in the pub in town that the men would frequent, when they weren't flying and have beverages. I stayed in the historic pub a mile from the airfield with my wife. She was dressed up, in a 1940s dress. And I came back there, I just started my talk in first person, like, I'm Clayton Stiles coming back to RAF Saltby. It's great to be back here, and I even called my wife Esther. Esther and I are thrilled to be here. And I gave that entire presentation in first person. And I gave like a mission brief, on the Normandy drop. And it was just such an amazing experience because the people in the UK, in Europe, the Netherlands, and France, they take immaculate care of our cemeteries over there. Yep. They educate their youth. Sadly, they care about it a lot more what this generation did than we do in America. And it's very evident there when I was there. And I just have so many friends there. And by the way, I was just one speaker that day. There were three other presentations. They had a bunch of reenactors with airborne gear there, Jeeps. They had like 6 Jeeps, a big tent set up. Yep. And I actually got to go at the end of the day. And that airfield is still being used by light aircraft and gliders there at that field. They took me up in a powered glider, and I went up with the pilot in a 2-person plane. My wife did too separately. She went first because she didn't know how long she was going to be up there in case she had to cut short. I said, honey, I'm going to stay up the full 45 minutes. I can tell you that right now. Yeah. But you go first, see how you like it, because she was, a little anxiety setting in. But we had a great pilot, and Dave Unwin was his name. And there's a powered glider where he took off, he'd cut off the engine, and we'd catch some thermals actually, up above the airfield. And I took pictures of the, of the World War II airfield. And I have a then and now kind of photo, the now photo that I took, looking down at the field, you can still see the 3 runways. Just an amazing day there on the 80th anniversary D-Day for Julie and I. And that whole event that day, there was a wreath laying ceremony first thing in the morning first, because the British are huge on that, a commemoration ceremony. If they're going to have some event, it's not just going to be reenactors and speakers. They're going to lay wreaths. They're going to have a full service. They had an RAF chaplain. I mean, it was cold out there, and we stood there, for 45 minutes, had a full service with a color guard, military color guard, music. I mean, it was the full deal, 5 people laying the wreaths. I'm in my World War II uniform, and I'm up there, one of the 5 people laying a wreath. Next to me was a 94-year-old man. His parents owned the pub a mile from the airfield. He was an 8-year-old boy during World War II.
Oh,
Ray Bennett's his name. He's the living connection to the guys that we're commemorating. Ray's 94, sharp as a tack, one of my best buddies in life. He was an 8-year-old pub boy. And so he laid one of the wreaths too. And just an amazing experience, Patrick. Julie and I will never forget.
Yeah, I was in Normandy just before the 75th anniversary, and your point is very well taken because there's I'll tell you a couple stories. One, just staying in town near the Normandy beaches.
Yeah.
As soon as people learned you were American, they would just go out of their way to be as nice as possible to you. And for whatever it's worth, people don't necessarily associate that with the French, but they're wrong because those folks really do appreciate what happened in June of '44. And I'll tell you, I had another friend who was having dinner nearby, and there were two women next to he and his girlfriend, and one was very young and one was obviously very, very elderly. And the young woman leaned over and said, are you two American? And she said, yes. And she said, well, my grandmother wants to thank you because she grew up in Normandy.
Mm.
And my friend said, well, you can tell her that my grandfather landed here.
Wow.
And the woman just, the tears, start flowing, and you can't speak language. They're not really communicating, but they had that moment. And I thought that was a really cool story.
Yeah, you're so right. My war college trip, I got to go to the Normandy area, and toward the cemetery, we laid a wreath. My class did, my seminar did, and we had a person from each service, and we had a French exchange pilot in my seminar too, and just a very neat memory there for me too. Going up to, if I'm saying it correctly, where the Rangers went up the cliffs at Ponte du Haut there.
Close enough.
Yeah, Ponte du Haut. I can't say it.
Pont du Hoc in French.
Yeah, I don't know French. I know Spanish.
Yeah.
But just.
Well, and it's a crime, I think, that so many people don't know that history because you just, without knowing that, you don't really understand everything that's come afterwards. Why we have the relationship we have with the British and the French and the Germans, and why America and Europe have been intertwined now for two generations.
Yeah. Just they care. The cemeteries are immaculate.
Oh, they're beautiful.
They teach their children. They pass on that knowledge of the Americans liberating them.
Yeah.
It's just no words. I mean, you have to experience it to see it. And it's wonderful.
Yeah. So let's circle back to the Mediterranean and to the book, if we can. What's your favorite story from that period?
It's funny you asked me that. Ever since I wrote the 60th book, that glider mission into Sicily, the disaster, and because of my affiliation, with the Glider Pilot Association, and I actually have a glider pilot friend. He's 102. He didn't fly that. He was there. He didn't fly that particular mission, but he was there when they took off.
Wow!
And I don't know. It was a British glider mission. And basically 24 hours before takeoff, the British were short 26 pilots, and they went to the Americans for volunteers, and 26 American glider pilots volunteered to fly, quote, a mission with the British, not knowing they were volunteering for the invasion of Sicily the next day because of the secrecy of that operation. They had no idea what they were doing. They volunteered. And so I've been, and you'll read about it, and a good portion about it in here, but that mission has just intrigued me forever. And I believe my next book, which is a lot smaller, but will be my greatest contribution to Mediterranean C-47 and glider ops, because I tell the story from the American perspective. It was a disaster. The British historians and works totally blame the Americans, C-47 pilots, for the disaster. A lot of times the first one to write the history, they set it in stone, the narrative. Sure. But I've actually believe I've uncovered some new evidence that there's just so much that went wrong. It was a combination of 10 different factors, some bad luck. The British actually put 3 more people into the glider than it was planned for. three more seats, and three more combat paratroopers in a wooden seats. That's like 800 pounds, almost 1,000 pounds.
Yeah, combat load
of weight in a glider, which is significant. But unfortunately, I could talk for a long time, but there's a 35 knot headwind once the gliders released. They were released offshore at night over water, which, by the way, that was the last time ever we had a glider release point over water. Many of the gliders, the majority of them, landed in the water, just a combination of a lot of factors. But just and this is, I believe, the formation the Americans flew. It was a four-ship right echelon formation, which you're familiar with flying jets. Our four-ship, package lead, element lead, with three wingmen, almost identical. But in right echelon, there's a direct, the winds were from the left, a direct crosswind on that four-ship element. And that four-ship element wasn't flying towards land. It was actually paralleling shore with the wind coming from shore. And just a lot of things went wrong. The formation became compressed. And, when you're number 3 or 4, the only place to move is to the right to get out of lead's way. When you start, things start going wrong and people start stacking up. And it was just a combination of factors, just kept pushing that formation further offshore. And a lot of the gliders landed in the drink. But why they picked that release point offshore, I talk about in the book. And it was a British orders, that picked all that stuff, and just an intriguing mission. So that is my favorite. Yes, my favorite, not because of the disaster, but there's just so many things went wrong, and it really needed a reattack. And I wanted the C-47 crews to have their day in court, per se.
Yeah.
On the factors that went wrong, and so there's actually mission analysis. It's not just a history, but there's mission analysis. Where I rediscovered, talk about things, and kind of trying to, I question assumptions and challenge history is why I wanted to write that book.
Outstanding. Well, I think those 26 pilots needed to learn something that I learned as a junior officer, which was Navy, NAVY, actually stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself.
Oh, yeah. The invasion of Sicily, and our U.S. Navy shot down 23 C-47s with 82nd Airborne paratroopers in them.
Doesn't surprise me in the least.
The British Navy shot down 6. And you'll read it in the Leading the Way to Victory. The 60th Birds shot down 6 60th Birds. Just so much went wrong in Sicily, and they kept that secret from the public for 8 months to a year.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Our own Navy, because
well, there was such a lack. In that war, there was such a lack of command and control. Yeah. When you really get down to it, when you know what the modern battle space looks like, and you compare it to World War II, you're talking about Stone Age technology in comparison. So blue on blue was a big deal in World War II.
Oh, yeah. And, you had 30 minutes prior to those C-47 paratroop formations coming over, their Junkers 88s, attacking the ships. So those gunners were jittery, and they were going to shoot at anything after that. They weren't, they were going to shoot at every plane that flew over.
Just like Stonewall Jackson's people at Chancellorsville.
Oh, yeah. But you talk about the lack of communication, trying to synchronize. The British are landing on the eastern shore of Sicily, the Americans kind of on the south.
Yeah.
And just two totally different zones and packages and forces involved, naval forces, air forces assigned, apportioned out, a British Airborne Division, an American Airborne Division, just trying to synchronize those ops just in that day of, you're right, just the fog of war.
Yep.
It just, you learn a lot in blood, unfortunately.
Yep. Well, cool. I will definitely look forward to that one coming out after I finish this one. So keep us posted. We'll get you back on. Mark, thank you for what you're doing. I really do sincerely appreciate it. I do think it's important that stories get told that haven't been told for whatever reason traditionally with World War II and the rest of the historical canon. So keep it up, man. You're living the dream in retirement.
Hey, thanks. It's fun. I may take a break after I get push these this tranche of 3 books.
I think you're
out.
entitled.
Yeah, I may take a break for a while, but it's funny that these unit histories they take 3 years. People want the unit histories because they don't exist, and they just take 3 years to do.
Yep. I have a little bit of experience with that. When I was, again, junior officer, public affairs officer, I put
awesome.
together a unit history for our squadron. And it's time consuming, especially when you've got a real job going on beside of it.
Oh, yeah. You know what's interesting, too? I'll say this. You have to remember the unit records from World War II, what you're looking at on microfilm is clerical records typed by clerks on typewriters. Okay. Yep. So there's lots of human errors, typos. I mean, so like Huey could be spelled 3 different ways, by 3 different clerks.
Yeah.
And then trying to interpolate and find out which one's the correct spelling. And then the microfilm's washed out. The records you get at the Air Force Historical Association from Maxwell Air Force Base. The microfilm records are washed out. There's typos. Some records you just can't read. They're washed out so bad. So there's holes in the records. And you're trying to that's what makes it challenging. You're trying to fill in those holes and try to get names right. And I always write a disclaimer, about typos and records. And, if I don't have a name quite right, it's not intentional. I'm doing the best I can. And sometimes I might have a crew member's name missing on an aircraft because I just couldn't see it, and there's holes and they're just there, and that's part of the hunt.
Well, you're good at it. And like I said, I hope you keep doing it.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. Thanks so much for having me on. Really, I appreciate you getting to know you, and I look forward to following your work as well. And awesome.
Yeah, we'll have you back. Thanks, man. This episode of the History Lessons podcast is sponsored by Victory Independent Planning. Hey, are you ready to take the stress out of your retirement? At Victory Independent Planning, we put you on the right trajectory with our exclusive VIP retirement glide path. Our smart approach prepares you for what's next by optimizing your sources of savings and income, your medical and healthcare planning, your advanced estate and giving strategies, risk management and investing, and tax planning. Let us help you glide into retirement with confidence. Text GlidePath to 239-567-5477. That's GlidePath, all one word, small letter G, to 239-567-5477 and receive a link to schedule a complimentary consultation. Do it today to start your journey on the VIP retirement glide path, because your future deserves a safe landing.
Here then are 3 lessons for modern investors inspired by Mark's book, Leading the Way to Victory. Number 1, prepare for opportunity, not just what's expected. When the 60th TCG became the first U.S. troop carrier group to deploy to England in 1942, their mission was to support the ongoing Allied advance. Yet just months later, they spearheaded the groundbreaking airborne mission of Operation Torch, adapting quickly to the unprecedented challenge transporting paratroopers over vast distances to capture critical airfields. The group's agility in preparing their new C-47A aircraft and their readiness to adjust to evolving strategies played a critical role in this success. So the lesson for investors is obvious, because markets are ever changing, full of uncertainty and surprise. Smart investors prepare not just for probable scenarios, but for opportunities or challenges that may arise unexpectedly. By staying adaptable, assessing the what ifs, and ensuring their portfolio is versatile enough to respond when times change. Second, let's focus on long-term strategy and not short-term fears. The 60th TCG engaged in some of the war's longest and most innovative missions, from towing gliders in Operation Husky to daring rescues during Operation Halyard. These feats often demanded significant risk and sacrifice. How could they not? Instead of focusing solely on immediate crises, the group maintained a long-term view. Hey, how could each mission, however challenging, contribute to the larger goal of victory? The lesson for investors here, investing is often a marathon and not a sprint. So staying focused on your overarching financial goals instead of reacting emotionally to short-term market fluctuations is a key to long-term success. Like the 60th TCG, it's about thinking ahead, assessing rewards against risks, and maintaining disciplined, strategic vision. Finally, innovation thrives in the face of challenges. World War II didn't come with a manual for airborne operations. Far from it. The 60th TCG had to create a playbook as airborne missions evolved. From aeromedical evacuations to glider operations, their success demonstrated an ability to embrace innovation in uncharted territory, learning through experimentation and adapting quickly. Mistakes and early losses became opportunities for growth and refinement. So the final lesson for investors here is that most successful investors don't fear change. They lean into it. Whether exploring new asset classes, leveraging cutting-edge financial tools, or adapting to emerging technologies, taking calculated risks and learning along the way fuels resilience, progress, and dare I say, eventual victory. In turbulent markets, innovation can drive the edge needed to sustain and grow your investments. Okay, Mark's Leading the Way to Victory is more than a chronicle of airborne operations. It's a study in leadership, trust, and decision-making under uncertain conditions. As modern investors, we can look to history for lessons in preparation, vision, and adaptability to build strategies that endure. Whether braving volatility in the stock market or exploring unfamiliar asset classes, success today depends on having the same mindset that defined the 60th TCG. A commitment to learning, adapting, and staying the course towards long-term goals with an eye towards eventual victory. Order your copy today of Leading the Way to Victory and discover more lessons from the extraordinary history of the 60th Troop Carrier Group. Well, my fellow historians, that's all for this episode, and we covered a lot of ground. Be sure to check out Mark's website. That's www.markvlahos.com. There you can find all of his books, as well as a biography and even some pre-order for his future publications. While you're surfing the web, check me out as well on Amazon. That's where my book is, History Lessons for the Modern Investor, or just text book to 239-567-5477, and I'll send you a copy. And please be sure to do all the social stuff with us. Like this episode, follow us wherever you see or hear your podcasts, because we're available on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Until next time, we'll take another rollicking romp through the past and make an investment in your future with history lessons for the modern investor. Thanks, everybody.